All right. Assalamu alaikum. Peace upon you all. My name is Rana, and Rana in Latin means the frog, and Spanish as well. But my parents didn't name me that for that reason. In Arabic, Rana means to contemplate. So I'm actually the contemplating frog. And because of that contemplation, I've tried to shift, and I invite you to join me. How do you shift yourself within a framework to another position so that you can see the world slightly differently? And when you do that, you see a whole new world that you never saw before. And it's like the famous saying, a scientist is seeing what everybody sees, but thinks what no one has thought. And that also helps you when you want to step out of that framework and create a whole new framework because you understand the different perspectives. So from that, I want to share with you what I do. So as human beings, we manifest ourselves because of two sources. One, the genetics that we receive from our parents and the environment we interact with. But it's not just that. We're much more complex because there's an interaction between our genes and the environment around us in multiple dimensions, which results in something which we call epigenetics. So what is epigenetics? Our cells kind of sense the environment around them, and as a result, turn on or off genes within the DNA. And this turning on or off results in change in function within the cells, which ultimately becomes behavior. So what does that mean in real life? So in real life, that means you are exposed to multiple experiences, both positive and negative, whether you ride a bike or you eat healthy, or you're exposed to trauma or violence or just a bad day. This impacts who you are, your epigenetics, and therefore your behavior. So first warning, just by listening to my talk, I'm impacting your DNA. So if you want to quit and leave, that's okay. Now, as a result of that, I was interested in a particular type of behavior that affected, from the environment around us that affected us, which is trauma. And the reason I'm interested in trauma is I am originally from Palestine, from Jerusalem. And my family had to leave Jerusalem in 1948. And ever since then, we've been living, not just us, but many others around the world, experiencing trauma continuously. Now, unfortunately, when people talk about trauma within the framework of science, it's all about like a one acute event, and then they study what happens after it. But in reality, if you talk to the people who are undergoing the trauma, it's continuous. So how do you study a continuous phenomena with terminology and frameworks that are based on an acute one phenomena? It doesn't work. And that begs us to redefine, introduce new terminology, introduce new frameworks so that we can understand how trauma affects us in a temporal continuous way, but also in a complicated way. Because again, mostly when people talk about trauma, they talk about the negative impact of trauma. They talk about anxiety and stress and so on. And what I wanted to introduce, being the daughter of refugees, can we look at it in a positive way, in a positive perspective? Can we look at thriving and flourishing and life satisfaction? And so instead of looking at the person who is experiencing the trauma as a victim, to look at them as people who have dignity, who have ownership and agency to control their lives going forward. And not to say that that I'm celebrating trauma. We need to stop the origin of all the trauma and stop arms and so on. But at the same time, we need to deal with this. And the reason I'm doing this positive take on it is because I draw from evolutionary history. Throughout evolutionary history of human species, we have been undergoing multiple traumas and continuous traumas, yet we thrive and survive, and here we are today. So, and we need to look at human beings in a holistic fashion, appreciating both the positive and the negative. And the reason is we want to understand that is to understand the biology, and then so that we can develop interventions and programs to alleviate the negative and improve on the positive. So I started a program called We Love Reading, hence the prop there, which is about reading aloud to children, using reading aloud as an experience to change mindsets through reading to create change makers, people who have agency. And this is an example of how a refugee can come up with a solution to their challenges that they design and they own, giving them hope for the future. And I'm inviting you to actually attend a movie tonight, a showcasing of a documentary, an award-winning documentary that tells a story of a Syrian refugee woman who married at 16, had 2 kids, never went to school, and suddenly now is a leader, a writer, and a change maker in her own right. And this is so that if we want to really help humanity and save humanity, we need to develop, understand the biology, and resource all over the world people who are undergoing those challenges to come up with those solutions, especially if you want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Lastly, you know, when you answer a question, you get 100 million other questions. So I was interested to see those epigenetic signatures of trauma, both positive and negative. Can we transfer them across generations? So if there's for example, a mother who is pregnant and undergoes a violent eviction, and she gets an epigenetic signature in her cells, are those transferred to her daughter and granddaughter and so on? We know that it happens in mice. In terms of humans, we were able to devise, because of the local cultural history, to study 3 cohorts of Syrian refugees, and we were able to discover, this is like very confidential, 34 new genes that have not been identified in a particular pathway that have been transferred epigenetically from the grandmother to the mother to the daughter. So when my daughter finally understood what I do, she told me, so Mom, you study, about the immortal kiss of our grandparents. Thank you very much.